What would you do if the men you cooked for climbed onto their wagons in the dark, took up the reins, and drove off across the salt without you? Not lost. Not a wrong turn in the night a shout could mend. Left on purpose, on the bare white floor of a desert that keeps no trail and forgives no mistake, with half a canteen of water gone warm as blood and a pair of town shoes never meant to carry a body out of a place like that. That is where this story begins. It is not where it ends, because the thing that saved her should not have been standing in that desert at all. Her name was Ruth Calloway. She was 22 years old, and on the night the wagons left her, she had been 3 weeks the cook of a freight party crossing the alkali flats of the Arizona Territory under a contractor named Boyd Kessler. She had taken the work because it was work, and because a girl with no people and no roof takes what is offered. She did not yet understand that Kessler had not hired a cook. He had gathered up the last loose thread of a thing he meant to steal and carried it out into the one country in the world where a loose thread could be made to disappear. The flats ran 40 miles without a drop of sweet water. Freighters crossed them by night to spare the stock the killing heat. Steering by the stars and by whatever a man had learned to read after nightfall, and by dawn a good party would be off the salt and climbing toward the wells on the far rim. Ruth had bedded down in the mule wagon a little after midnight with the stars wheeling overhead and the mules blowing soft in their traces. When she woke there were no mules, and no traces, and no wagons. There was the white ground going gray and a wind already lifting, and where the wheels had stood the wind was smoothing the ruts closed as a hand smooths a made bed. By full light there would be nothing to say a wagon had ever passed. There would be nothing to say a girl had ever been born. She stood up in the cold, and she called out once, and the flat took her voice and gave back nothing. And she understood in that first minute the whole shape of what had been done to her. She did not waste a second minute. She had half a canteen and the sense to know the fort lay 2 days east and the rim a day north, and no legs on earth could make either before the sun found her. So she chose the north, because north was the shorter lie, and she walked. I want you to settle in with her a while, wherever you happen to be watching from tonight. Pour something warm, let the salt dust settle with you, and tell us down in the comments what corner of the country you are listening from, because this is a long walk, and she would be glad of the company. Before this is over, you will know how a lighthouse came to stand in a waterless desert, 500 miles from any sea. You will learn who kept its lamp burning for 28 years with no keeper anywhere on the county books, and in the end you will see what an old man sealed behind that riveted iron door at its foot the week he died. A door the whole territory swore opened on nothing but an empty cellar. I mean to walk you to all three. I only ask that you cross the flats with Ruth first, because near dawn, with the sun not yet up, but the sky gone the color of a struck match, dying on her feet and past the place where the mind keeps faith with the eyes, Ruth Calloway saw a light. It stood out on the playa to the north and west, where nothing stood. A tower, a true stone tower, tall and slender and rounded, with an iron cage at its crown, and inside the cage a lamp was burning, steady in gold, throwing its shine flat across the salt so that the ground between her and it glowed like the floor of an oven. She knew what it was, as you know a word in a language you cannot speak. It was a lighthouse. A sea light, the kind that stands on a headland over black water to keep ships off the rocks, and it was burning here, out on a dead white sea with no water in it at all, 40 miles from the nearest creek and a month's hard travel from the nearest tide. Her father had told her about that light once when she was small, though she had forgotten it until this moment dragged it up out of her. The old Callaway light, he had called it, out on the flats, dark since before she was born. The county had 100 names for it, Ghost Light and Folly and the Dead Man's Candle, and not one soul in the territory believed it had shown a flame in 28 years. Amos Callaway had believed otherwise, and had said a strange thing about it once, the kind a child files away without knowing why. A light doesn't ask who's lost, he had said. It just burns and lets the lost come to it. Ruth went toward it. And here's the thing I have been keeping from you. The thing she saw when she had closed half the distance and could make out the lamp itself flickering in its cage. The light was not steady. It went dark and gold, dark and gold, in a pattern. And the pattern had a shape she knew in her bones before she knew it in her head. 3 short flashes, then one long one, over and over, patient as a heartbeat. It was a knock. It was the knock her sister Naomi used to tap on the wall between their beds when they were girls and the house had gone quiet and one of them was frightened of the dark. 3 short and 1 long. I'm here. Go to sleep. I'm here. Naomi had been gone 6 years. Naomi had run off, the family said, run off with a man and never written, and their father had died with her name unsaid. And now a dead light in a dead desert was tapping the childhood knock into the dark, and Ruth Callaway, who had 1 swallow of warm water left and no reason on this earth to believe in anything, could not make herself believe in that. So she did the only thing left to her. She kept walking toward the impossible thing, to prove to herself it was a lie before it killed her. Stay with me here. To understand what she walked into, you have to understand what she had already lost, and how a young woman with nothing came to be the most dangerous person in Boyd Kessler's world. Ruth Callaway had not always had nothing. She had been raised the younger of 2 daughters in a plank house on the good side of a territory town, the child of Amos Callaway, who held what the county called a road and water contract, and of a mother dead so early that Ruth kept her only as a smell of cedar and a way of humming. A road and water contract in that dry country was near to holding the keys to the kingdom. It meant a man owned the legal right to a crossing and to the water along it, and in a land where a barrel of sweet water could cost more than a barrel of whiskey, the water was the whole of the wealth. Amos was not a rich man in coin. He was rich in the single thing no man could dig up or burn down or carry off, and he guarded it as other men guard gold. There had been 2 girls in that house. Naomi, the elder by 4 years, dark and quick and restless, forever at the window looking down the road. And Ruth, quiet, watchful, the one who learned her father's papers by heart because she liked the weight of important things. When Ruth was 16, Naomi fell in love with a young freighter passing through, and there was a quarrel. The kind of quarrel that a proud father and a proud daughter can turn into a wall in a single evening, and one morning Naomi's bed was empty and her good dress gone. She left no letter. Amos waited a year for 1, then 2, then stopped waiting out loud, though Ruth caught him more than once at the window Naomi used to keep. The town decided Naomi Callaway was a runaway and a disgrace, and said so behind their hands, and Amos let them, because a man will let the world believe a small, ugly thing to keep it from guessing at a larger grief. Then, 3 winters back, a fever went through the low end of the county, and it took Amos Calloway in 9 days. Ruth nursed him and buried him and came up from the grave to find that being an orphaned girl of 19 with no brother and no husband is, in the eyes of the law and the town both, very nearly the same as being no one at all. The contract, the water, the crossing, all of it went into probate, a great slow machine of paper that a girl was not thought fit to steer. And into that machine, smiling, came Boyd Kessler. Kessler was a freighting contractor out of the county seat, a wide, easy man of 50, with a soft handshake and a hard eye, better dressed than anyone he stood next to, with a heavy gold watch chain and a voice made for reassuring the nervous. He came to Ruth within the month with his hat in his hands and a paper in his coat. The paper was a bill of sale. It said that Amos Calloway, 3 weeks before he died, had sold Boyd Kessler the road and water contract entire for a sum, and it carried Amos Calloway's signature at the bottom and a witness and a seal. Ruth read it standing in the door of the house that was no longer hers. She read it twice, and the second time the floor seemed to tilt very slightly under her, because she knew her father's hand as well as she knew her own, and the hand on that paper was not his. It was close. It was very close. Whoever had made it had studied Amos Calloway's signature and copied its bones. But her father had a way of finishing the L in Calloway with a small backward hook, a little flourish he had carried since he was a schoolboy and had put on every paper Ruth had ever filed for him, and the L on this bill of sale ran straight down and stopped, obedient and dead. And the date. The date said her father had signed it on a day Ruth remembered with terrible clarity, because on that day Amos Calloway had already lost the use of his right hand to the fever and could not have held a pen to save his soul. She had spooned broth into him that day. He had wept because he could not hold the spoon himself. "That is not my father's signature," Ruth said. Kessler's face did not change. That was the thing she would remember. He had expected her to say it, and he had already decided it did not matter. "It's witnessed and it's sealed, Mrs.," he said gently. "I'm sorry for your grief. Grief makes us see things crooked. You come down to the county seat, and we'll get it all recorded proper. And I'll see you're not left wanting. I'm not a hard man. Ask anyone. She should have run then. But a girl of 19 with no money and no counsel does not run from the only man offering her a wagon out of an empty house. And over the next 3 years, as the probate ground on and Ruth drifted from one poor situation to another, she learned to keep her mouth shut about the L with no hook. She learned that Kessler had bought or frightened every man who might have witnessed for her, and that a forged paper, if it is the only paper in the room, becomes the truth by simple arithmetic. And she learned, too late, that a man like Kessler does not leave a loose thread lying about forever. Sooner or later, he ties it off. So when Kessler's foreman found her cooking in a railhead boarding house that spring and offered her wages to feed a freight party crossing the flats, wages better than the work was worth, Ruth should have heard the trap close. Perhaps some part of her did. But she was tired and hungry, and the wages were real, and she told herself a man does not haul a girl 40 miles into the desert to be rid of her when a dark alley in town would do. She was wrong. A careful man does not leave a body where a body might be found. He leaves it where the wind keeps house, out on the flats. Which is how Ruth Calloway came to be walking north across the salt at dawn with an empty canteen toward a light that had been dark for 28 years, tapping out a knock that only she and all the world could read. The last mile she did not so much walk as fall forward and catch herself over and over. And the light stayed patient in its cage, dark and gold, dark and gold. The tower grew as she came on until it stood over her like a church over a field, 60 feet of dressed stone streaked black. Where a century of rare rain had run down it, its foot drifted deep in wind-blown salt. She reached the foot of it as the sun cracked the eastern rim, and the whole flat went from gray to blinding white in the space of a breath. She put her 2 hands flat against the warm stone as if to hold the tower up or to be held up by it. Then her knees went, and the ground came up soft and white to meet her. And the last thing she saw was the little iron door set low in the tower's foot, banded and riveted like the door of a safe, and the last thing she thought was that she had walked 40 miles to die against a locked box in the sand. She did not die. She came back to herself in pieces, in a cool, dim, round room with the smell of stone and old smoke, with something wet and blessed being pressed against her cracked lips a drop at a time, and a low voice she could not hold on to saying the same word again and again, a name, though whether it was her name or another she could not have said. She tried to open her eyes, and the light was too much. A hand smoothed the hair back off her forehead, a work-hardened hand that shook a little, and the voice broke on the word it kept saying, and Ruth slid back down under before she could climb up to it. Twice more she surfaced. Twice more the water came, and the hand, and the voice. On the 3rd time she slept without falling, and when she woke it was full day, and she was alone. She lay a while on a narrow cot, piecing the world back together. Above her the room went up and up, a hollow stone throat with an iron stair spiraling the inside of it, climbing to a trap of light at the very top. She was inside the tower. Someone had carried her in and laid her down and kept her alive through the worst of the morning. She sat up, every joint singing, and made herself stand, and went to the low doorway to see the place that had saved her. In the flat white light of midday, it was a ruin. That was the plain truth of it, and it went through her like cold water. Whatever she had seen in the dark, daylight gave it the lie. The great iron gallery that ringed the lamp room at the top hung half torn away, its rail buckled and trailing down the stone like a broken necklace. The water tanks along the base, 3 of them iron and enormous, were rust through and bone dry, their staves sprung. Sand had drifted man-high against the north side and buried the lower windows, and the tower itself was not straight. It leaned subtly and horribly 2 or 3 degrees off true, canted where some old flood had come roaring down the wash a lifetime ago, and scoured the salt out from under one side of its footing, so that the whole slender height of it stood poised in the act of falling, and had stood so, she would learn, for 20 years. It was beautiful, and it was dying, and no lamp burned at the top of it at all. The cage stood cold and empty against the noon sky. A dying woman's mirage, Ruth told herself. That was all it had been. A fevered brain throwing up a comfort as the body failed, a knock from her childhood laid over a trick of heat and starlight. There had been no lamp lit on those flats for 28 years. She had very nearly walked to her grave, chasing a thing her own dying mind had made, and only blind luck, some drifter squatting in a ruin, had pulled her in out of the sun. She almost believed it. She wanted to believe it, because the other thing, the knock, was too large to hold. And then she began, without meaning to notice. The lamp in its cage was cold, yes, but when she climbed the iron stair on shaking legs and stood in the lamp room at the top, breathing hard, she found the great lens clean, spotless, A first-order sea lens, a beehive of glass prisms taller than she was, and every facet of it wiped bright as a wine-glass, throwing little rainbows on the stone. In a room where the floor was an inch deep in a generation of dust. The brass fittings gleamed. The wick, when she leaned close and looked, was trimmed, squared off clean, and even by a careful hand, as a wick is squared when it is meant to burn again that very night. And laid on the sill of the lamp room, out of the weather, was an oil can, and the can was not empty, and the whole high room, under the smell of dust and hot iron, carried the faint sweet reek of lamp oil freshly spilled. There was no oil in 100 miles. There was no clean thing in this whole ruin but the one thing a keeper would keep, if a keeper still kept it. Decay everywhere, and at the heart of the decay, tended like a grave that someone still visits, the lamp. Ruth stood very still in that high bright room, and down through the hollow tower came a sound from the room below, a footstep. And then the small domestic sound, absurd and enormous, of a knife going through the crust of a loaf of bread. She came down the iron stair one slow step at a time, and at the bottom, in the round watchroom she had woken in, a woman stood at a plank table with her back to the stair, cutting bread. A loaf still warm, its steam faint in the cool air in a desert where nothing baked and nothing grew. The woman was lean and browned and dressed in a man's canvas coat gone white at the seams. Her dark hair shot with early gray and bound back in a single plait, and she stood as she had always stood, weight on one hip, head tipped to the work, and Ruth knew her before she turned. Ruth had known her from that first blessed drop of water pressed to her lips, and had not let herself hear it. "Naomi," Ruth said. The knife stopped. For a moment the woman did not turn, as if turning might break the thing, and when she did turn her face, was the face from the window at the end of the hall, older, weathered, worn down to something truer, and her eyes were already streaming. "You read it," Naomi said. Her voice shook, out there on the flat. "You saw the light going, and you read it. I have been tapping that shutter every night for 6 years, Ruthie, and I told myself it was foolishness. I told myself no one was left who could ever, and then this morning there was a girl coming across the salt, following it in, following the knock. And I thought, God help me. I have finally gone as mad as they all say I am. They said you ran off. Ruth's own voice came out of strangers. Papa died thinking you ran off. I know it." Naomi set the knife down, careful, as if it were the only thing keeping her hand still. "I know it. And there is a story in that, and I am going to tell you the whole of it, every piece, I swear it. But first you are going to sit down before you fall down, and eat and drink slow, because whatever ran you out onto those flats to die, little sister, it will have to come through me now, and I have gotten very hard to move." And Ruth Calloway sat down in a ruined lighthouse on a dead white sea and ate warm bread from her lost sister's hands. And for the length of that one meal the world was very simple and very whole. It would not stay simple. But let me stop us here a moment, because Ruth was about to face a choice. Somewhere east lay a fort, and the law, and the long, hard road of walking into a county that had signed her out of existence and making them write her back in, against a rich man who owned the machine of it. And here, at her hand, was a light that asked nothing of her, a sister returned from the dead. A cool stone room and warm bread, and a place the world had already agreed to forget. She could fight for a name in a town that had discarded her, or she could vanish into the one place that would keep her. If you were 22 and a half dead and you had just been handed back the only person you had left, which would you have chosen? The fort or the light? Tell me in the comments. I do not think there is a wrong answer, but I will tell you which one Ruth chose and why and where it led her. And it led somewhere neither sister could have guessed. She chose to stay. Not forever, she told herself, only until her feet would carry her and her mind would clear. The choosing was not really about the fort or the law. It was that she had buried her whole family and been told the last of it had run off in shame, and here the last of it stood cutting bread, and Ruth was not going to walk away from that for any name or any water or any wrong on earth. Not yet, not while the bread was still warm. So she stayed, and over the slow gold days that followed. As the tower gave up its coolness in the mornings and drank in the heat by afternoon, Naomi told her the story, a piece at a time, as a person tells a thing she has not said aloud in years. Naomi had not run off with a man. That much the town had right and wrong at once. There had been a man, a young freighter she loved and meant to wed, and when Amos forbade it, being proud and being frightened for her both, Naomi had done the proud daughter's foolish thing and gone anyway, the pair of them set on reaching the county seat, marrying, and coming home with the deed done and no argument left to have. They had joined a small party crossing the flats by night, the last party of that season, and far out on the salt a storm had come down off the rim, as they do in that country, out of a clear evening, a wall of wind and stinging alkali that put out the stars and swallowed the lead wagon's lantern and turned 40 miles of flat white ground into a howling nowhere. The party lost the line. The party lost each other. By morning the storm had passed on, and the flats were smooth and bright and empty, and of the little crossing party there was one soul left alive, and it was Naomi. And she was alive because a light had come on in the dark where no light should be, and she had crawled to it. There was an old man kept it, Naomi said. They were sitting in the door of the tower at evening, the flats going rose and violet, and this was the first time she had said his name, and she said it carefully. Elias Pruitt. He was the keeper here, from the very start, from when they built it. And he had kept it lit alone for 22 years by the night he pulled me in, though not a living soul knew he did. He saw the storm come down, and he knew there was a party on the salt, and he had oil for maybe one more month of ordinary nights, and he burned near the whole of it in that one storm, threw it on the wick, and let it roar. Because he said a light that hoards its oil is a lamp in a cupboard, and no use to God nor man. And I saw it, and I came. Her jaw worked. The others were closer to it than I was, some of them. They did not come. I have never understood why I lived, and they did not, except that I could read the one thing they could not, which is that a light means a hand. Somebody's hand. I crawled toward the hand. The man she was to have married did not crawl toward the hand. Naomi did not say his name then or ever after, and Ruth, watching her sister's face close over the place where the name lived, did not ask it. Some doors you leave to the one who owns them. Pruitt should have died that winter and did not. Naomi went on. He was old, and the storm took something out of him, and I stayed to nurse him because no one else would, and because I could not then. Face going home a widow before I was ever a wife, to a father who had told me exactly this would come of it. I stayed a month. Then the month was a season. Then he taught me the lamp, how to trim it and float it and shutter it, how to read the weather off the rim, and somewhere in there the light stopped being the thing that kept me and started being the thing I kept. And I understood the old man at last, because you cannot keep a light every night of your life and go on believing you do not matter. The light will not let you believe it. That is what it is for. She smiled, a little crookedly. He had a saying he lived by. A light doesn't ask who's lost. He said it like a law, like something handed down. Ruth's breath caught. She had last heard those words in her father's mouth, and before that never, and here they were again in a dead man's. And the two men had never met that she knew of, and the coincidence of it opened a small, cold space in her chest that she could not yet name and did not try to. Stay with that if you would, because it matters more than either sister knew, and we will come back to it. Elias Pruitt had died 3 winters past, in the same hard season that took Amos Calloway, though the sisters would not put those 2 deaths side by side until later. Naomi had kept the light alone since, and she had done one thing more every single night that she was slow and shy to confess. The shutter, Ruth said. The knock. 3 short and 1 long. You have been tapping it. Every night. Naomi would not look at her. It is not for the ships, Ruthie. There are no ships. I told myself at first it was a signal, a keeper's habit, but that is a lie I keep for daylight. It was for you. It was the only letter I knew how to send that did not need an address. Because I did not have one for you, I did not know if you were alive or where, and I could not write, and I could not go. And so every night I worked the shutter as we used to knock on the wall, and I sent it out over the flats to nobody, to anybody, to you if the world was kind, which it is not. 6 years. Now she did look up, and this morning the world was kind exactly once. But that is not the whole of the story, and Naomi did not yet know the half of what she had been keeping, and neither did Ruth. And the not knowing is the hinge everything else turns on. Because there were 2 things in that tower that Naomi had never fully reckoned with, and Ruth, who had been raised to love the weight of important papers, was exactly the person to reckon with them. The first was the log. Pruitt had kept a log, a keeper's tending book, as every lighthouse keeper is bound to. And it ran back the full 28 years, his hand for most of them and Naomi's after him. Ruth found it the second evening, a great swollen ledger bound in cracked black leather on a shelf above the cot, and she opened it and turned the stiff pages by lamplight and understood that she was holding 28 years of a man's nights in her 2 hands. The early pages were in a firm square hand, Pruitt's, and the late pages in Naomi's rounder one, his then hers, the handwriting changing over like a season changing, and the entries were almost all the same, 1 line to a night, the same handful of words repeated down the years like beads on a string. Lamp lit. Nobody died tonight. Some nights carried more, a wind out of the north. Oil low, must send to town careful. A party crossed, 4 wagons, off the salt by dawn safe, and a very few nights carried a great deal, a name, a rescue, a burial, out on the flat, with the initials cut into the log margin, small, careful crosses beside them. Ruth read the night Naomi came, in Pruitt's square hand. Storm off the rim, bad, burned the winter oil, 1 girl in. God forgive me the rest. She read it and closed the book and could not speak for a while, and Naomi did not make her. The second thing was the door. I told you at the very start of this that there was a riveted iron door set into the foot of the tower, and that the whole territory believed it opened on an empty cellar. Naomi believed it too, more or less. It stood in the thickest part of the base wall, banded iron gone the color of dried blood, and it was sealed, not merely locked, but sealed. A bar across it, and over the bar a great disk of hardened wax stamped with a keeper's mark, and Elias Pruitt had set that seal himself in the last week of his life. Naomi had watched him do it. He had been failing by then, in and out of sense, but on this one thing he had been iron clear. He had barred the door and sealed it and made her swear on the lamp that she would not break it. Not thieves, he told her, not weather, would that door be opened for. It was to be opened by the one it was kept for, and by no other, and she would know the one when the one came. And until then, the light would keep watch over what lay behind it, the same as it had kept watch for 28 years. Then he had died, and Naomi, who owed him her life and her sanity both, had kept her oath. For 3 years she had lit the lamp above and left the door below alone, and told herself the old man's mind had wandered at the end and never quite believed it. "He never told you what was behind it?" Ruth asked. "He told me it was the reason for all of it." Naomi looked at the dark disk of wax. "The reason the company built the light. The reason they left it. He said the light was never really for the ships that never came. He said, and I remember it word for word because it made no sense to me, he said, the lamp was never marking the trail, girl. It was marking the water." She shook her head. "There is no water here, Ruth. The tanks are dry. I haul what we drink 11 miles from a seep. If this place has taught me anything in 6 years, it is that there is no water on these flats at all." But there was. And Ruth Calloway, standing in the lamplight, looking at a sealed door her sister had sworn not to open, was about to understand why a man would build a sea light in a waterless desert, and why a company would seal the truth of it behind iron and wax, and why a whole county had been let, even helped, to forget. To understand that, we have to go back to the beginning of the tower itself, 28 years before, to the year they raised it and the year they abandoned it, which, as it happens, were the very same year. In the year 1859, this ground did not lie in Arizona at all. No one had yet drawn the line that would cut the territory in two. It was all still New Mexico territory then, raw and enormous, and men were laying wagon roads across it in every direction, each one gambling that his road would be the road, the main line west, the one the whole country would pour its freight and its people down. A company out of the South, the Salado Freight and Water Company, made that gamble here on this crossing. And they made it on the one thing that decides everything in a dry country. Water, for while the 40 miles of flat ran bitter and dry on its face, a man of the company, boring for a well footing, had struck something no one expected beneath the poisoned salt, a deep, sweet vein running cold and clean off the far mountains under the whole bed of the playa, the one drinkable water in a 2-day ride. The company sank a great well down to it and capped it and set a toll on it, and then they did a shrewd and a costly thing. They built a light over it, not a trail marker, a watermark. They raised 60 feet of dressed stone and put a first-order sea lens at the top of it, a light that could be seen the width of the flats, so that a party crossing by night, dying by inches as such parties did, could steer not toward a town or a trail, but toward water, toward the well and the toll and the company's open hand. It was the cleverest thing in the territory, and it was going to make them kings. And it failed inside the year. The great southern road went through 100 miles to the south. By an easier grade and a string of army wells, and the traffic that was to have poured across these flats and paid the company's toll simply went another way, all at once, like a river jumping its bank in a flood. And the Salado Freight and Water Company, which had sunk every dollar it had, and a great many it did not, into a well and a tower on a road that nobody drove, was bankrupt before the mortar in the lamp room had properly cured. And here's the thing they did then, the thing that poisoned the valley for a generation. A bankrupt company's assets go to its creditors, and the one asset the Salado Company had left that was worth a penny was the sweet well, the only drinkable water within 2 days' ride. Rather than see it sold off cheap, or worse, opened free to every crossing family who might have watered stock on it for nothing, the company did the coldest sum in the book. They capped the well tighter than a drum. They sealed the wellhead behind an iron door at the foot of their own light, walled the truth of it up in stone and rivets, and let it be understood, up and down the county, that the tower was a folly, and the well was dry, and there had never been anything out on the bitter flats but salt and wind and a dead man's dream. A thing no one believes in cannot be bought, or claimed, or fought over. The company died, its few creditors were paid in worthless paper, and the one man who knew the whole truth of it was the keeper they had hired and could no longer pay. An unmarried freighter of 40 named Elias Pruitt, who was ordered to douse the lamp, lock the tower, and walk away. He did not walk away. He doused the lamp for exactly one night, and lay awake thinking of parties dying on the salt with no light to steer by, and sweet water sealed under their feet out of spite, and in the morning he climbed the stair and lit it again, and he kept it lit for the rest of his natural life, and told no one, and asked no one's leave. That is the whole of Elias Pruitt, if you care to know a man. He was told to put out a light over water that people needed, and he could not make himself do it, and so he spent 25 years and every dollar he could scratch keeping a lamp burning for travelers who had mostly stopped coming, over a well he was forbidden to open, for no wage and no witness and no reason but the one that needed none. One more thing, and then I will let the sisters open the door, because you have earned the door, and so have they. When the Salado Company's holdings were sold off at last, for pennies, the paper deed to that sweet well, the water right itself, the legal ownership of the thing that decided everything, was bought at the bankruptcy by a canny young settler who understood exactly what he was buying when no one else did. His name was Calloway. It came down through his family, father to son, and ended in our own time with Amos Calloway, who held the deed to the buried well and the water rights that went with it, and who kept the document itself, the one paper that proved who owned that water. In the safest place he knew in all the territory, sealed behind iron at the foot of a tower everyone had agreed to forget, in the keeping of an old friend who shared his strange proverb about light, which is why the ghost light on the flats had carried a family's name for 30 years, and why not one soul left alive could tell you whose. It was the Calloway light. And 2 Calloways were sitting under it in the dark, and neither of them knew. They opened the door on the 4th day. They did it together at dusk, with a lamp lit above them so that the whole tower hummed with its old work. Ruth had told Naomi everything by then, the forged bill of sale, the L with no hook, the date her father could not have signed, the 3 years of probate, the wagons driving off in the dark, and when she came to the end of it, Naomi had gone very white and very still and said, "Say his name again." The man who left you. And Ruth said, Boyd Kessler. And Naomi said a thing under her breath that a lady does not say, and then she said, then the door is yours to open, little sister, oath or no oath. Because I think the old man was waiting for you and never knew your name, and she took up the pry bar and the knife. The wax came away in dark curls under the blade. The bar was harder, rusted into its brackets, and it took the two of them leaning their whole weight on the pry to break it, grunting, boots skidding in the sand, until it gave all at once with a shriek of iron, and they both went down in a heap and lay there, laughing the way you laugh when you are too frightened not to. Then Naomi lit a second lamp, and Ruth pulled the iron door open on its shrieking hinges, and a breath of air came out of the dark behind it that stopped them both where they knelt. It was cool. Not the cool of a cellar, but the living cool of a thing with water in it, moving air, the smell of wet stone and cold depth, the one smell that whole country did not have. Ruth crawled in first with the lamp held out ahead of her, into a small, round stone chamber sunk beneath the tower's foot. And there at the center of the floor was the wellhead, a broad iron cap bolted over a shaft of dressed stone, and when she laid her hand flat on the cold cap she could feel it, faint and certain, the deep hush of water standing somewhere below, sweet water, and 40 miles of bitter salt in every direction, capped and hidden and waiting under a light for 28 years. She put her cheek against the iron, and she wept, and she could not have told you for whom. And on a stone shelf above the wellhead, wrapped in oilcloth against the years, Elias Pruitt had left 3 things. The first was a flat tin box, and in it the old company's own papers, the survey of the sweet vein in a draftsman's careful ink, the toll accounts of the single season the well had ever earned, and the original grant of the water right, the deed itself. Ruth unfolded it under the 2 lamps with her hands not quite steady. And read the legal lines down to the bottom where the title had been assigned and reassigned over 30 years in a chain of faded signatures. And at the very end of the chain, in an ink not so very old, the deed to the sweetest water in all that dead country was made out plainly and lawfully to a single name. Amos Calloway. Her father, the one paper that proved who truly owned the water, and therefore the crossing, and therefore everything, the paper Boyd Kessler had killed to bury, had lain here under a burning lamp the whole time, kept safe by a stranger, waiting. It was ours, Naomi said. She had gone down on her knees beside Ruth, and she was staring at their father's name as if it might vanish. Ruthie. The light. The water. All of it. It was ours the whole time. I have been keeping my own family's light for 6 years, and I never once she stopped. She pressed the back of her hand hard against her mouth. 6 years of a mystery she had lived inside of had just turned itself inside out. And the old man who could have told her had gone into the ground with the secret intact, keeping it for the one it was meant for. Never knowing the woman lighting his lamp shared that one's blood and name. The second thing was smaller. A folded page, thick paper, sealed with the same keeper's wax as the door, and written across the outside of it in Pruitt's firm square hand were the words, for the one the light brings when the door is open and not before. Ruth's fingers found the edge of the wax. Naomi's hand closed over hers. Gentle. Not yet, Naomi said quietly. He waited 28 years to write that. It will keep one more night. Read it when the whole thing is finished, little sister, whatever it is, because I think that is what he meant. When the door is open and not before. and Ruth, who wanted more than anything to break the seal that instant, set the folded page back on the shelf beside the deed and left the last of Elias Pruitt unopened, as you leave a gift until the giver's own hour. What it said would keep one more night, and it changes the shape of everything. So it has to come last. That was the old man's one condition, and he had earned it. The third thing on the shelf can wait for its own hour, because it was the smallest of the three and it turned out to matter most, and Ruth did not even understand what she was looking at that night when she set it in her satchel. They had the deed. They had the water. And 2 mornings later, before the sisters had settled on what to do with either, the deciding was taken out of their hands, because a plume of dust came up off the southern flats that had not been there before, and resolved as it came on into 3 riders and a spring wagon, and at the head of the riders, sitting his horse easy in a good gray coat, rode the man who had left Ruth Calloway to die. He had not come hunting her. That was the thing that undid him, in the end. The sheer easy confidence of a man who believes a problem is already solved. Kessler had come to the flats on ordinary business, or business he had made to look ordinary. Beside him on the spring wagon seat rode a thin, nervous man in a bowler with a leather case on his knees, the county assessor, and Kessler had brought him out to view and to value the old Calloway light, so that the county might condemn the abandoned tower as a hazard and a ruin and sell off its 60 feet of good dressed stone for hauling, stone being dear in that country and a dead man's folly being nobody's loss. It was a small greed laid over a large one. With the girl who disputed him dead on the salt and the estate about to close, Kessler was tidying the last corner of it, pulling down the one landmark that still carried the Calloway name, so that in a year no one would recall there had ever been a Calloway claim on anything at all. He rode up into the shadow of the tower, and he looked up at it, and then he looked down, and Ruth Calloway was standing in the open iron door at its base in her ruined town shoes, looking back at him. Ruth watched his face and never forgot it. It went through not knowing her, because the mind refuses, and then through knowing her, and then through a fast gray slackening, the look of a man who feels a floor give way beneath his boots, because Boyd Kessler understood before a word was spoken that he had already made a mistake no apology could call back, and that he had made it in writing. "Mrs. Calloway," he said. He got down off his horse slow. He was smiling by the time his boots hit the ground, the warm smile that did not reach his eyes, but his voice had a crack down the middle of it. "Thank God. We'd word you were lost off the crossing. I've had men out." "You have not," Ruth said. "I have grieved for you. You have not done that either." She did not raise her voice. Naomi had come to stand at her shoulder, and behind them, in the shadowed doorway, the lamp of the well-room burned, and Ruth found she was not afraid, which surprised her, and she would think later that it was because a person who has already been left to die on the salt has spent the worst coin fear has to spend. "You drove the wagons off into the night and left me half a canteen and smoothed the ruts so no one could follow. You have sworn to my death already, I think, in more places than your face can keep track of. You should not have brought a county man with you, Mr. Kessler. You should have come alone." The assessor was looking back and forth between them with his mouth open. Kessler's smile held, but his hand had drifted toward his coat, and the 2 riders behind him had gone still in their saddles in a way that was its own kind of language, and for one long breath the flats were very quiet, and the thing could have gone the ugly direction, the one Kessler knew best. Then Naomi said conversationally, "There is a rifle on you from the gallery, Mr. Kessler. And the woman holding it has kept this light alone for 6 years and can thread a needle at 40 paces." It was a lie. No one stood on the gallery. The gallery was a wreck. But Kessler did not know that, and he looked up at the broken iron rail against the sky, and the two riders looked up, and the moment when guns might have settled it slid past and did not come back. Because Boyd Kessler was a fraud and a coward and a forger, and such men will kill a girl in her sleep, but they will not draw against a rifle they cannot see. He took his hand off his coat. "There's no call for any of that," he said. "No," Ruth agreed, "there is not. You are going to ride back to the county seat, Mr. Kessler, and this county gentleman is going to ride with you, and so are we. And we are going to lay some papers in front of the United States Marshal and let him do the calling." They rode in the next day, all of them, and word of it went ahead as such word always does, so that by the time the little procession came up the main street of the county seat there were folk out on the boardwalks to watch. The same folk who had pitied Ruth and shrugged at Naomi's name and let Boyd Kessler weigh their grain on his crooked scales for years, and they watched a dead girl ride in alive. It was done in the front room of the land office with the marshal presiding, a lean old man named Durant who had no patience left for fools, and it was done with paper, not powder, exactly as it should be. Ruth laid it out in order, as her father had taught her to love. Here was the bill of sale Kessler had used to take the water right, and here on it was Amos Calloway's signature with the L run straight and dead, and here beside it were 3 genuine papers in Ruth's keeping that carried the same signature with the small backward hook her father had put on every L of his name since he was a boy. Here was the date the bill of sale claimed the sale was made, and here, from the doctor who had attended him, was sworn word that on that date Amos Calloway had lost the use of his right hand entirely. And here, Marshall, was the deed itself, the true grant of the water right, made out to Amos Calloway and never conveyed to any living man. Which meant that whatever Boyd Kessler had bought with his forgery, he had not bought the water, because the water had never been Amos Calloway's to sell in the state the forgery claimed, and was now, by plain inheritance, his daughter's. Kessler's lawyer began to talk, and that is when Ruth laid down the last paper, and it was not one of hers. It was one of Kessler's own. To close the probate on the estate and take final title, Kessler had been required to file with the county a sworn affidavit as to the death of the last Calloway heir, and he had filed one, duly stamped, duly witnessed, swearing that Ruth Calloway was dead. And the clerk, hunting the record at the marshal's order, found that Kessler's affidavit of her death was dated 2 full days before the freight party had ever set a wheel on the flats. He had sworn her dead before he had killed her. He had been so certain of the salt that he had done the paperwork in advance. The room went very quiet. Marshal Durant picked up that affidavit and read the date and read it again and set it down and looked at Boyd Kessler for a long moment with something that was not even anger, only a deep old tiredness. "You swore a death 2 days before you took her out there," Durant said. "Son, you didn't forge a sale. You wrote your own confession and stamped it at the county's expense." And then there was the log, Pruitt's patient book, with its one entry from 6 years back in the old man's square hand, a night some men brought crooked freight to a dark tower to change its marks, and one of the marks was a brand the county still had cause to remember. It was more than enough. It was, the marshal said, the easiest arrest he had made in 20 years. Because the man had done all the work himself. They did not hang Boyd Kessler. This is not that kind of story, and Ruth found she did not want it to be. He was undone, not destroyed, which is worse for a man like that and better for everyone else. His forgeries unwound, his stolen contracts fell to pieces. The county that had feared his credit discovered it no longer had to, and he went east under indictment to answer for a fraud so thoroughly documented in his own hand that no lawyer alive could have talked around it. And the crooked scales in his store were carried out into the street and broken up for the iron. The last Ruth saw of him, he was a gray man in a gray coat, looking smaller than he ever had, and she felt no triumph watching him go. Only the odd, clean quiet of a debt marked paid. That night, the sisters went down into the well room together, and Ruth broke the wax on the last page at the mouth of the well, because that had been the old man's one condition, and it seemed only right to keep it to the letter. Pruitt's square hand had thinned at the very end, but it held. She read it aloud, and her voice went down the stone shaft and came back up softened, as though the water were listening. The company built this light to sell water. I kept it to give it. The desert is a sea, and someone is always crossing it. Keep the lamp. That was all of it. 28 years of nights, and at the bottom of them 4 plain lines and his name. And under the name lay the third thing from the shelf, the small thing Ruth had not understood, which she understood now. It was his keeper's seal, the little worn iron die that stamped the wax, the mark of the one who tends the light. The deed only said who owned the water. The seal said who was charged with giving it away. Elias Pruitt had left the water to a Callaway and the keeping to whoever opened the door, and Ruth was both. And she closed her hand around the cold iron of it and knew she had been left the better half. The knock, she said after a while. 6 years, Naomi. You said it was a letter. Naomi was quiet a long moment, there in the lamplight over the water. It was to you, she said at last. I never knew your name would be the one at the end of it. I only knew the wall between our beds, and I worked the shutter as we used to knock it, every night, out into a dark where no one waited. Because a body has to say, I am here to someone, or she stops being anywhere at all. And one morning the someone came walking in off the salt. She laughed, and it cracked in the middle. You always did answer that knock, even when we were small. Even from 40 miles out, even half dead on your feet. You heard me. The rest is the part I like best, and I am not going to hurry it. The tower and the ground under it had gone to the county years before for unpaid taxes, a worthless reserve that no one would bid a cent on, and Ruth Callaway bought all of it back at the courthouse sale for $8, the light and the well and the leaning stone together. The cheapest and the truest thing she ever bought in her life. And then the 2 sisters did the very thing the company had killed to prevent. They took the cap off the well. They opened the sweet water of the flats to every crossing family and every freighter and every lost and thirsty soul who came, free, deeded free in a plain paper Ruth drew up in her own hand and stamped with an old man's mark, water that no one would ever again buy or corner or weigh on a crooked scale. Word of it went out across the territory. Parties took to the old crossing again, steering by night toward a light they had learned they could trust, and the county that had laughed at the ghost light and called it a dead man's folly came inside of a year to set its clocks by it, because in a hard country a light that never once fails is the most dependable thing there is. And on the ordinary evenings, when the flats went rose and then violet and the first stars came out over the salt, you could have seen two women climbing the iron stair together to trim the wick, the elder teaching the younger the small exact motions of the work, and afterward the younger sister sitting down to the great black book to write the day's line under 28 years of older hands. The same handful of words 1,000 nights had worn smooth. Lamp lit. Nobody died tonight. Further down the page, on an evening when she was feeling the true shape of the thing, Ruth wrote a line of her own. The treasure was never under the light. It was the light. There was one thing she never learned, and never once tried to. Somewhere in Pruitt's long book was the name of the man Naomi had meant to marry. The one who did not crawl toward the hand that bad night on the salt, set down in the keeper's record with a small, careful cross beside it. Ruth knew the page was there. She never went looking for it, and Naomi never offered it, and that name stayed the one door in the whole tower that the younger sister left forever sealed. Some griefs are not treasure to be dug up. They belong to the one who carries them, and you let her carry them in peace. If you have stayed with Ruth and Naomi across all these miles to the end, thank you for staying. It means more than you know. We would be honored if you would leave a like before you go, and tell us down in the comments which part stayed with you the most, the knock tapped on the wall, or the well opened free to everyone, or those 4 quiet words in the log. And if a still evening with a forgotten frontier story is how you like to unwind, subscribe and let us send you the next one, another tale of the forgotten frontier. Until then, keep a light in your own window, for whoever out there is still crossing the dark. We will see you next time.